Talladega. That's all there is to it, honestly. Every time NASCAR goes to Talladega, there's a lot of anticipation and hype over the race. The action is it's action packed, a lot of carnage. The whole spill. But honestly, this year there were a lot of, or at least this weekend, there were a lot of underlying storylines, which is not uncommon for Talladega to have. But to me, I just saw these stories as more interesting, if not just as interesting as the actual racing itself, which is saying a lot because this weekend was actually pretty fun, all things considered. So let's just get right into it. So for the Xfinity race, the main storyline was Jeffrey Earnhardt driving number 3 for RCR on like a one-off start, I believe, with Larry McReynolds, America's crew chief, at the helm. They ended up winning the pole, which got a lot of people hyped for that number 3 team. And RCR as a whole was pretty solid, looked pretty solid in qualifying, with Jeffrey on the pole and then Austin Hill in second and Sheldon Creed in fourth. So a 1-2-4 for RCR. And from the outset of the race, when the race began, there was just smart racing from everyone. Lots of action, but they kept it clean, compared to the ARCA race earlier today. And I don't really talk about ARCA much because, that series, to me, I just don't pay attention to that series. It's become a complete joke in my opinion. Ever since NASCAR acquired ARCA, it's become a joke in my opinion. But it was night and day compared to the ARCA race. A lot of action, but everybody kept it clean. Josh Berry ended up winning stage 1 after a few shuffling of lead changes. That's all there is to it, honestly. Stage 2, JJ Yeley, another surprise here. JJ Yeley driving the 66 for Carl Long. He took the lead, and he held it for a few laps. And even after he lost the lead, he held on to the top 10 for quite a few laps now. But honestly, for the most part, there wasn't really a lot of, interesting storylines I had to follow. Just more of the same. There were a few more saves and close calls with Brett Moffitt, Sheldon Creed. A few drivers made some amazing saves. Stage 2 ended under caution though, because I believe it was in the final lap or heading towards the end of stage 2, Chandler Smith, Josh Berry, Mason Massey, JJ Yeley, Brett Moffitt, a few of the underdogs that were running pretty well in so far in the race. They got taken out. Mason Massey especially, he got a hard hit on the same spot that Chris Cockrum hit back in 2016. That wreck where he was sent spinning like a top. Mason Massey hit that same exact spot, and it was a really hard lick. Again, that Talladega, that thin strip of the wall of the wall where Talladega ends, that has become a very trickery spot. If you hit there, you're gonna go in for a while right there. Chandler Smith was also making his Xfinity Series debut, by the way. So again, a really tough break for him. He had to drop out. Justin Allgaier ended up winning stage 2. Stage 3, due to it being a longer stage, because usually with Talladega races, at least in the Xfinity Series, it's 25% of the race, and then stage 2 is 25%, and then stage 3 is the entire second half of the race. Since it was a longer stage, there was a lot of less action to start stage 3, but the action picked up as the race went on. There were also a few cautions for wrecks as well, but mostly it's a lot of that has to do as well with the fact that every time a crash happens, it doesn't matter if it's like in if it's in another stage that it happened, but every time a crash happens, that it is usual on super speedways, but every time a crash happens, the drivers usually like they are a bit hesitant to make moves because they don't want this to turn into a wreck fest, as if it's not like the final leg of the race. But eventually there was a crash, and Joe Gibbs Racing just freaking imploded. It all started with Ty Gibbs getting a push from his best friend Ryan Sieg. Ryan Sieg pushed a little bit too hard. It sent Ty Gibbs out of line, and then he tried to blend back in, but the opening the gap just closed on him, and he ended up clipping Daniel Hemrick, hooked him into the wall, and from there he just took out Brandon Jones, took Drew Dollar with him. David Starr was also involved. All three JGR cars got involved. It was really expensive. Ty Gibbs was the only one taken out in the wreck, and again, a lot of people are saying that this wreck was Ty Gibbs' fault, and Ty Gibbs isn't really, after what happened at Martinsville, Ty Gibbs isn't really like the most popular driver in the garage, for lack of a better word. But at the same time, I feel like I feel like the fans are overreacting to this incident, because I don't think that Ty Gibbs, because I just don't see it. Ty Gibbs didn't do anything that was egregiously wrong here. I really don't get how Ty Gibbs is at fault here. The guy was pushed out of the lane, like he tried to get back in line, and then Hemrick, and this is another thing that people miss, when he hooked Daniel Hemrick, it's not like he came down on Hemrick. Hemrick also went up to try and side draft him just as Ty Gibbs was coming down to get back in line. So I can understand when the broadcast, Kurt Busch and Austin Dillon, who were in like the broadcast booth, they were saying that yeah, he got out of line. He wasn't completely out of line, but he wasn't gonna blend back because the gap was closing already. So he had no choice but to go back to the rear. I can understand the go to the rear approach, but at the end of the day, this was 100% a racing incident. No ill will intended. Most of the blame goes to Ty Gibbs, but Daniel Hemrick also went up there to side draft him, and they both ended up causing the accident in the end. So at the end of the day, it was just a misjudgment. Classic Talladega split-second decision making that can either make or break a race to you. Again, misjudgments are just part of racing. You just gotta deal with it. Drivers are not as great as these drivers are, as professional as these drivers are. They're not human. They're human. They're not perfect. And again, this is something that I agreed with, because Kurt Busch, like I said, great on the booth. His analysis of that wreck was just so on point. He was speaking true facts, and I mean, Austin Dillon also chimed in a little bit there. They carried this broadcast. And overall, for this weekend, Fox the broadcast was actually so much better than in the first quarter of the season. Maybe, in my opinion, this is like the best weekend broadcast-wise I have seen out of Fox. Like the booth, the coverage was better than any of the races than any of the first 9 weeks of the season. So moving on with that, heading into the final laps, there was another big wreck. This time, Brandon Jones, once again another Joe Gibbs Racing driver, he came down on Drew Dollar, which was a big mistake because he wasn't clear. He ended up taking him and his teammate out, as well as Cas Gralla, Brandon Brown, and Ryan Vargas. And from that point on, it turned into cautions breed cautions, because It was entering like the final 15 laps of the race. This wreck happened with, I believe, less than 10 to go, 8 or 9 to go, I believe. But the point is, the race restarted with 4 laps to go. Sam Mayer couldn't take a push. Allmendinger was like bomb drafting Sam Mayer a bit too hard on the back straightaway. Sam Mayer, this obviously threw Sam Mayer off balance because, you know, he is a young driver. He cannot take a push really well. He ends up collecting Austin Hill, the guy who had dominated this race. He got led like half the laps of this race. Again, a lot of people blaming Allmendinger for this. Again, like what I said with Ty Gibbs. This is classic Talladega usually. You know, when it's the final laps, people are gonna get racy and aggressive, and this kind of stuff is bound to happen, especially with young drivers like Sam Mayer, for example. They'll be fine. That experience is a guy's best friend. Eventually, Sam Mayer will know how to take a push, from a driver on a super speedway. But this race went into overtime, and with this race becoming wide open, with the best car of the race being taken out, you know for a fact this was anybody's race now, and this also meant more wrecks. So in the first overtime, Sheldon Creed, Cesar Baccarella, Gray Golding, they got together, and Sheldon Creed just got a hard hit into the wall that, even with how safe these cars are, you gotta give credit to NASCAR for, keep improving on safety, because that was a hard hit at a pretty nasty angle for Sheldon Creed. Then on the second overtime, fuel mileage came into play because these drivers had put on enough fuel to make it to the end, but not to make it through multiple overtime. So fuel mileage became a factor as well. Jeremy Clements ran out of fuel, so the race didn't end on second overtime. It had to end on triple overtime. Third time's the charm. Justin Allgaier was leading on the outside lane, but just as the leaders were going to take the green flag, he runs out of fuel. There was no caution because Allgaier managed to make it to the infield garage on time, and Noah Gragson took the lead. And on the final lap, a hard charge from Jeffrey Earnhardt to try and make it to try and win this race, but he just fell short of the win. Gragson ends up winning. The last man standing for JR Motorsports, because if you remember, Josh Berry ended up getting caught up in that wreck in stage 2. Then Justin Allgaier ran out of fuel. Sam Mayer crashed out of the race. So Gragson was the only driver that wasn't involved in like any major wrecks. He ends up winning the race for JR Motorsports. And Jeffrey Earnhardt ends up finishing second. And while he didn't manage to complete, while he wasn't able to win this race and make this make a great story for NASCAR, I still believe this is a great story because a Junior Motorsports car won, and then Dale Senior's car number finished second. So Dale Junior won, Dale Senior second, that stuff. So this is honestly fine. At least now people know what Jeffrey Earnhardt is truly capable of, and hopefully he gets more opportunities like this. Hopefully RCR expands his schedule for other races, not just Daytona or Atlanta Super Speedway, not just the Super Speedway races, but also a few other 1.5 mile tracks as well. Because Jeffrey Earnhardt, a lot of people forget, when he was running for Joe Gibbs Racing in 2019, he had a few good runs here and there. Especially, I remember at Charlotte in 2019, he managed to finish third, which used to be his career best finish up until now, of course. But Jeffrey Earnhardt, my point is, someone give Jeffrey Earnhardt a chance. Even if it's just like a part-time schedule on a good team, just to, as a tryout for a bigger opportunity. But this guy is so much better than what his finishes suggest, because he has been driving for backmarker teams his whole life, almost his whole career. So he definitely deserves this chance, because he got this opportunity with RCR and he made the most out of it. Now, coming into the Cup race, there wasn't a lot of practice here because of NASCAR's new practice and qualifying format. There wasn't a lot of practice compared to the past few years. But honestly, looking at how the race went, I feel like drivers can do with less practice. And starting to grow this new practice qualifying format is starting to grow on me, even if I feel like at some tracks the drivers are a bit short on practice. I feel like they could do a bit with a bit more practice. But overall, I'm starting to grow on this with this new practice qualifying format. Joe Gibbs Racing teammates on the front row, Christopher Bell and Martin Truex Jr. first and second, which is really surprising because the Toyotas aren't usually known for being good on super speedways. And the reason for that is pretty simple. It doesn't have to do with anything that they do differently from the Chevys or the Fords. It's just that if you look at the grid, there are only 6 Toyotas on as charter teams. As far as the full-time charter team goes, there are only 6 full-time Toyotas compared to 15 Chevys and 15 Fords. So yeah, Toyotas are very limited. You only have Joe Gibbs Racing and then 2311. All these guys, they gotta work together. Basically, if you're driving a Toyota, you're basically teammates with Joe Gibbs Racing. That's basically the name of the game. But yeah, Toyota was good in practice and qualifying. Another surprise was Daniel Hemrick qualifying third. And the start of the race was even more crazier than the Xfinity race. The first 11 laps were nuts. With Christopher Bell, William Byron, Daniel Suarez, Martin Truex fighting for the lead. Eventually, there were drivers like Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin. Drivers were dropping back, and the field went single file eventually because drivers were starting to drop back. They were starting to calm down. And once everything settled down, Suarez ended up leading a sizable chunk of laps, pretty much. And with Talladega races, usually something that we saw at the Daytona 500 was that the drivers that were running at the back of the pack, they eventually lost the draft. But for some reason in Talladega, this wasn't the case because at least for the first 30 laps of stage 1, there was one big pack. Nobody fell out of the draft outside of Landon Castle, who had to, because of inspection failures, he had to complete a pass-through penalty at the start of the race. So that's why he lost the draft and fell a lap down early. It's because he didn't have a chance to get in the draft. But after the leaders caught up with Landon Castle and put in a lap down, he managed to blend in with the pack and not lose the draft. So this was for the first 30 laps of the race. We saw one big pack, nobody falling out of the draft, and the gap between the leader and the last car on the lead lap was only 3 seconds. They sometimes went as close as 2.4 seconds during that run. They were within 3 seconds of each other. That's what I'm trying to say. Eventually, this came to an end when Tyler Reddick blew an engine, and that kind of separated the field as Tyler Reddick went down the pit road. He had engine problems, and this was another theme because there were a few ECR engines who had a lot of problems, and this is something that happened during the Bristol Dirt Race as well, with Austin Dillon and Ross Chastain having engine problems. ECR is still having engine problems because now Tyler Reddick, the guy who almost won the Bristol Dirt Race, now drops out of the race and had to settle for a last place finish. So how crazy is that? Life really comes at you fast. 1 week you're competing for a win, you're inches away from your first career win, and the next week you're just 30 laps in, dropping out of the race with an engine failure. I gotta feel bad for Tyler Reddick, especially because this race put him below the cut line. Reddick has had like so many races that he just couldn't close out because of just terrible luck. And even though he has 3 top 5s in the first 9 races, the fact that he also has crashed out a lot, that has put him below the cut line. Now it's just 1 point below the cut line, but the fact that he's not safe yet, it's really surprising, I gotta say. This season is very wide open. If that wasn't pretty obvious to you, like, if you really think that Talladega is going to give us a sign of who the best drivers are this season, then yeah, you're watching the wrong race. Eventually, a few laps after Tyler Reddick blew the engine, there were green flag pit stops, and some mayhem happened. Hamlin overshot his pit stall, Cody Wurst spun out, Keselowski, Ross Chastain were penalized, and they were eventually lapped because stage 1 went under green, pretty much. Again, pitting on super speedways is hella difficult. Like, going to pit road on every single racetrack has its own way of going to pit road. There is not like a track that is like easy entry on pit road. I mean, you look at Indianapolis, the pit road is too narrow. You look at Atlanta, ever since their reconfiguration into a super speedway, it is one of the more I wouldn't say dangerous, but one of the more difficult pit road entries. Daytona and Talladega also too, because you gotta communicate with, all of your teammates, quote unquote, they gotta be on the same page. Because if you pit with the wrong group, or if you pit by yourself, then you're gonna lose the draft, and you're eventually gonna get lapped. So you really don't want to do that. Another thing that I really wanted to talk about, and this goes with the fact that Fox's coverage was great. A huge part of that was the Dale Earnhardt Jr. being in the booth today, crossing over from NBC in a one-race deal with Fox. Dale Jr. was brought in as a color commentator for the Talladega. For this Talladega race, and his analysis and his color commentating was so insightful, and also his color commentation and also his role as a color commentator was so great. He added a lot of bits with he blended in very nicely with Mike Joy and Clint Boyer. So overall, again, while I would love to see Dale Jr. be full time on the booth, we're running both Fox and NBC. At the same time, I understand why he wouldn't do that, because I mean, he's got a family now. He's a family guy. He's a family man now. But Dale Jr., my point is, Dale Jr. in the booth was one of the main reasons why the broadcast was just so enjoyable to watch. Also, the fact that the coverage in general was great, because even if you have a great booth, we have seen it before, when you have a great booth can only carry you so far if the coverage is not, if the cameramen are not doing their job well. But this was just, as far as the broadcast goes, this was just a great Talladega was just a great broadcast-wise. That's if that wasn't obvious enough to you. So anyways, towards the end of stage 1, it became a battle for the stage between Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson. Bubba Wallace was leading the outside lane with his Toyota teammates. There was Kurt Busch, Martin Truex Jr., and Christopher Bell. And then Kyle Larson was on the inside with his Chevrolet teammates, most of them being his Hendrick teammates. William Byron and Chase Elliott were there. Alex Bowman wasn't there, but that's mostly because he pitted with a different group. He was he wasn't on the same page as his Hendrick teammates. He was doing something different. He pitted with the Toyotas, by the way, which was honestly, funnily enough. But yeah, Toyota versus Chevy, and this is something that was the theme for the entire race, was the Chevrolets and Toyotas got the leg up and the Fords were nowhere to be found. That most of that has to do with the fact that some of the big dogs for Ford were taken out later on in a wreck. Also, Keselowski, that speeding penalty he got in stage 1, that wasn't the first time he got penalized in this race. He also got penalized later in stage 3, so that was another big blow to Ford because they were nowhere to be seen towards the end of the race. But yeah, towards the end of the stage, there was this moment when the leaders were going to catch Keselowski and Ross Chastain. Actually, Keselowski had already been lapped, but they were about to catch Ross Chastain and Michael McDowell, because Chastain and McDowell, they were working together to, try and hold off the lead pack. They didn't. And McDowell, when the leaders came by, Michael McDowell, he held his line. He stayed on the inside. But Ross Chastain, for whatever reason, I know he's doing this for the free pass because Keselowski was also catching up. He was in the lead pack trying to catch Chastain for the free pass. But Chastain just made some crazy move, like trying to go to the middle, and everybody had to split him out, and this was a really precarious situation. Eventually, this stage ended in a wreck because Daniel Hemrick, driving another ECR engine, he blows up the motor, and this causes a stack up. Daniel Hemrick, he gets bumped into the apron by Austin Dillon. He tries to save it, but then the car just shoots up the racetrack, and it collects Chase Briscoe and Chris Buescher, and both of them are taken out, and Bubba Wallace ends up winning stage 1. So then we go to stage 2, and with a few of the leaders pitting and tires not being a big deal at Talladega, most of the time when pit stops happen, you usually see the leaders either taking fuel or taking 2 tires. Very rarely are you going to see somebody taking 4 tires, because track position and staying in the draft is more important at Talladega. Also, the fact that track position allows you to avoid the big one, because historically the big one usually happens around mid-pack. But anyways, as soon as stage 2 begins, another ECR engine blows up. This time it was Greg Biffle. And on the restart, there was a wreck, and this was the wreck. And this led to a few restart wrecks that actually made stage 2 a little bit spotty. But overall, on the first restart after Biffle blew up his engine, BJ McLeod, who was coming off of a pit stop, he had a loose wheel, automatic 4-way suspension for the crew chief and tire changer, just like that. And then on the next restart, there was a stack up because William Byron and Chase Elliott, they were restarting first and second. Byron had chosen the outside lane, Chase Elliott chose the inside, and Byron was the leader, so he was the control car. As soon as the green flag waved, William Byron, he went down to the inside, to go with his teammate. and Martin Truex Jr., who was the second car on the outside lane behind William Byron, he was waiting on Byron to make his move. He was like, lightly pushing on the brakes. He wasn't going because Truex wasn't going to go until Byron had completely made his move. This caused a little bit of a stack up. Eric Jones got stacked up, Logano got stacked up, and then Bubba Wallace got stacked up as well. And this eventually caused a wreck, which took out Logano, it took out Daniel Suarez as well. Harrison Burton was involved, Austin Cindric, Cole Custer, Stenhouse, Ty Dillon, Todd Gilliland. So, once again, this is a typical Talladega wreck, just racing. When somebody makes a move like that, the field, the lane, one of the lanes, they stack up, and a wreck like that usually happens. It isn't the first time this has happened. I remember a late race restart. A similar thing happened in 2012. Yeah, the 2012 spring race, which happened 10 years ago. There was a late race restart crash that happened like that. So, similar to that. So, this isn't the first time a wreck like this has happened at Talladega. This is more common than what you think. So, overall, the rest of stage 2 was went pretty flawless. It went under green the rest of the way. Hendrick Motorsports took total team control, and William Byron ended up winning stage 2. And then stage 3, it was single file for the most part, because just like the Xfinity race, drivers aren't gonna make their moves until later on in the race. Also, the fact that stage 2 was a little bit messy and it took out a few of the big dogs, drivers were a bit hesitant to make moves. They were a bit hesitant to make their moves. They just wanted to get to the green flag pit stops. But after the green flag pit stops, there were a lot of moves throughout the race. It was clean moves most of the time too, which is once again surprising for a race that usually gives you more practice, because again, these Cup guys had limited practice. A lot of that had to do with the fact that the next gen cars, when they were going through tech inspection, I saw a little clip on social media that the teams were covering the cars with umbrellas because they feared that the hot Alabama sun was going to do something to the cars, that they were going to cause them to fail inspection. I didn't quite read on that a lot, but the fact of the matter is that just goes to show you how fragile these next gen cars are. Something as trivial as the hot sun, as the hot Alabama sun is going to affect, is going to mess up something on the car that's going to cause you to fail inspection. It's a bit silly, yeah, but again, this is what these teams are working for with this new next gen car. Again, this Gen 7 car hasn't been completely figured out yet. As time goes on, we're gonna be able to see more of these guys experimenting, of course, within the boundaries. And hopefully NASCAR becomes a bit more lenient with the rules. Hopefully a bit more transparent as well, because I'm not gonna lie, that Brad Keselowski penalty was a little bit suspect. I'm not gonna lie. The fact that NASCAR wasn't very transparent, isn't very transparent with the rule book, is a bit, it's really upsetting me, honestly. But overall, getting back to the race, green flag pit stops. We had green flag pit stops during stage 3. Keselowski got busted for speeding on pit road again, and Kyle Busch and Christopher Bell, they collided. Christopher Bell ended up spinning out, and Kyle Busch, thankfully, nothing was messed up on the car. I was worried at first that the collision would have caused like the rear toe link to be damaged on the 18 car, because you know how fragile the toe link is on those Gen 7 cars. But thankfully Kyle Busch was able to make it to the end of the race, and he managed to score a third place finish. So shout out to that. So on the final laps, heading into the final laps, because stage 3 went green the rest of the way. So this was a lot of really... So, you know, stage 3 had some really fun racing, fun and clean racing towards the end. It was pretty fun. So the final laps had Kyle Larson versus Eric Jones battling for the win. Eventually, the white flag. Eventually, Larson would not make his move until the last lap of the race, coming up of turn 4, coming into the tri-oval. But the problem is Larson waited too long to make his move, and this led to Kurt Busch and Bubba Wallace wrecking. William Byron also wrecked in the middle of all of that. Eric Jones went up to block, but this ended up giving, and all of this pandemonium on the final lap, it ended up giving the free, you know, opening the door for Ross Chastain for him to steal that win. And for the second consecutive time, the winner of the race leads only one lap, the final lap. For the second consecutive week, the winner leads only one lap to win the race. That lap was the final lap, the one that matters the most. So, once again, Ross Chastain has become a multi-time winner this season, and Trackhouse Racing is absolutely legit. We have to start taking this team more seriously, because a lot of people thought that, you know, their early season success was going to, they were eventually going, was maybe a fluke. Some people were thinking that they were going to fade as the season went on. Well, with Chastain winning 2 of the first 10 races, those are also his first 2 career wins now. And the fact that Trackhouse Racing has also adopted really well, has also meshed really well with this next-gen car, because this is another thing. And this is another beautiful thing about this new car, is the versatility and the flexibility behind it. Because this car was the same car that Ross Chastain used to win a COTA, which was his first career win. Like, his first 2 career wins have come with the same car, the exact same car. He got to COTA, he won a COTA with that car, and then he turns around, they go to Talladega a month later with the same car, and they win that race as well. So, you know, they better keep that car safe for Phoenix for when Chastain makes the championship 4. If Chastain never makes the championship 4, or he's in a must-win situation, they better get that car ready for Chastain to come up clutch, because honestly, that car is like has become Trackhouse Racing's like new lucky charm of sorts. But overall, another thing I really wanted to talk about was the Kyle Larson thing, because a lot of people were really upset. Also, not the first time Kyle Larson has adored someone like this. If you look at Justin Haley in the Clash, then Chase Elliott at Fontana, and now with Kurt Busch at Talladega now. This is the 3rd time this season, and the 2nd time in the first 10 points races, because the Clash was a non-points race. But, you know, this is the 2nd time in 10 races that Larson has done something like that. Now, of course, again, just like what I said, Fontana, it's the final few laps of the race. This one was the final lap of the race, actually. And Larson had been coming off a huge run. He was going to pass Eric Jones, because if you look at the replay, Ross Chastain was pushing him. Definitely, he wasn't pushing him enough to where he got loose, and that's why he shot up 2 lanes to the outside, because that's not exactly what happened. I do not understand why Larson fans are saying that type of stuff, because That's not what happened. Larson was preparing his move on Eric Jones. That was the move he was going to make. The problem was that he waited so long to make his move, and the reason for that is pretty simple, because like Kyle Larson said, he has said it time and time again that he is not a super speedway ace. Like these super speedway races like Daytona, Talladega, Atlanta, that type of racing is his Achilles heel, because he is very hesitant to make big moves on the big tracks. And when he tried to make his potential race winning move on Eric Jones, it was a good move. The problem was that he waited too long to make his move. The timing and execution was a little bit too late. So when he shot up, when Ross Chastain gave in a bump, when Ross Chastain gave in a push, and Larson got a run on Eric Jones, he tried to go to the outside, but Kurt Busch was there, and he ended up dooring him. Larson got loose, and Eric Jones, he went up to block because he thought that Larson had made his move. And all of this opened the door for Chastain to steal the win. So, again, the people who are blaming Larson for this and are saying that, oh, this is your Cup Series champion now, he won a championship and he's acting like crazy now. You people need to calm down, seriously. Because, once again, like I said, this was a misjudgment. Like I said with Ty Gibbs on yesterday's Xfinity race, this was a misjudgment. Drivers are not perfect. Misjudgments are bound to happen, especially on the last lap. Misjudgments are part of racing. You just gotta deal with it. Sometimes they work. This type of moves, especially on the super speedway, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And look, hey, even if Kurt Busch and Bubba Wallace and a few other guys, they didn't make it to the finish line, at least Kyle Larson did, and he finished home 4th. That was his first top 5 on the super speedway, so I guess something good came out of that. I guess not for 2311 though, because that was a very expensive final lap for Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan. Next thing you know, Michael Jordan is going to come out and take this personally. But anyways, as for the letter review, I'm going to give this race a solid A. The racing was fun all throughout. Like, I'm going to say the few low points were, the Xfinity race getting a bit like wrecky, a bit of a wreck fest towards the end of the Xfinity race. Also, there was that stretch in stage 3, that little stretch in stage 3 where they were running like single file. Like, again, I know this is like necessary because they're just logging laps, waiting for the laps to wind down, racing to the green flag pit stops and stuff like that. But that long green flag run at the end of the race almost it made up for it. That was like, as you guys know, I am a sucker for green flag racing, for long green flag runs. I really liked that. Also, the fact that they were running like in one huge pack. That the Cup cars were running in one large huge pack to start off the race. That was also pretty exciting. Overall, same old Talladega. One of the more fun Talladega races I have watched in recent years. And as for the driver of the day, I'm going to give it to Eric Jones. Because ever since that Fontana race where he was one of the best cars, I feel like Eric Jones hasn't had like the best start to the season. He got gained a pension for becoming, this kind of late race caution clock that you were banking on. Like if a late race caution happened, it usually was Eric Jones, but great race for him. Kind of sad that he didn't win because I was kind of pulling for him at the end for him to hold off Larson, Chastain, Kurt Busch, and those guys and win that race. But at the end of the day, what can you do? It was still a great showing for him. One of the better races I have seen, not only this season for Eric Jones, but throughout his career as well. And I really hope that, this is like, a bit of a bit of a galvanizer for him to turn his season around and get back to how he was at the start of the season. So anyways, yeah, that's it. Watch out for Trackhouse Racing because this team is on the rise. Definitely. Definitely.